Throughout his distinguished career, Notti has served as Commissioner of the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services, Community and Regional Affairs, and Commerce, Community and Economic Development. What's the acronym for that? The Department of Commerce. Okay, CCED is the acronym. He has also served as president of Doyon Limited, and at the age of 89 was called back to public service as Alaska's Commissioner of Commerce, Community, and Economic Development in 2022. His advocacy for Alaska Native rights spanned more than 5 decades. There will be an opportunity at the end of the presentation for you to ask questions. But I think I've known Emil for more like 3/4 of my life. I was a university student in Fairbanks, and it happens that his mother, Madeline, was born in Rampart. So we basically had a connection from the same village on the Yukon River. So all of you, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for the introduction. It's glad to see a bunch of young people here. You should know the background of what happened with the land claim, so I'm glad to see you. Sorry I lost my voice this morning, it seems like. First, I want to thank Rosita for putting on the lecture series, and she's doing a great job with shareholder, Sealaska Heritage Institute. Today I want to describe conditions in Alaska that existed during the formation of AFN and the land claims effort. Native people were anxious because their historic land use was being restricted and deeded to the state, homesteaders, and others. Traditional free use of land was being lost. In 1963, 1,000 Native people from 24 different villages urged Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall to stop transfers of land to anyone, any federal lands. That was called the Little Land Freeze. The new state was selecting 100 to 3 million acres of land, mostly for economic development, without regard to native use. Minto Village, traditional use area, is a good example. Minto Flats sustained the village for food and trapping. Near to Fairbanks, the state was going to turn the area into a recreation area for cabin sites and hunting sites. The village protested. Similar events were happening in other regions of Alaska. There was a plan to dam the Yukon River near Rampart for hydroelectric generation and inundate 6 or 7 villages without regard to what would happen to people in the village. These events all planned without village input, and others were causing great concern for the disregard of native villages. The catalyst that started us on the path to a settlement happened in January 1966. The BIA area director in Alaska, Bob Bennett, was called back to DC to be vetted for Commissioner of the Bureau of Indian Affairs before the Senate Interior Committee. Just go back to one step here. For the Atomic Energy Commission also planned to set off a bomb near Point Hope to blast a deep water port on the coast, northwest coast of Alaska, without regard to the Point Hope village that was nearby. These events caused great concern for the disregard of native use of land and the traditions of the land. The chairman of when Bob Bennett was back before the committee, the chairman of the committee, Scoop Jackson from Washington State, asked Mr. Bennett what he would do to lift the Indians out of the conditions they have been in for the last 200 years. U.S. spends hundreds of millions of dollars on the conditions, and conditions never change. He asked Bob Bennett, what would you do different? You're an Indian. He was an Oneida Indian. And he said, come back in 90 days with a written report. The report came out in April 1966. It covered the nation. The Alaska section was short. It said the BIA was going to draw up a final solution to the land problem in Alaska. The problem was the natives were protesting the state land selections. The state filed claims for traditional use, ownership over Alaska. The natives filed traditional use and claimed ownership of all of Alaska. I knew nothing about the condition. I was a young engineer, had no experience in the public or speaking or anything else. But I thought someone would speak up about the issue, but nothing happened. When nothing happened, I wrote a letter in July 1966 to 14 Native people around the state. If we have any rights in land, we should get involved. I sent the letter to Howard Rock at the Tundra Times. He liked the idea and supported the statewide meeting. It was a dream of Howard Rock and Nick Gray to have a statewide meeting. This was the opportunity, and they supported it. I had the help of Stanley McCutcheon, compliments of the Tionic Village. I suggested October 1966 for two reasons. October 18th specifically because it was 99 years since Alaska was turned over to America by the Russians. And the second reason was it was an election year. The governor, congressman, senator were all on the ballot. It turned out to be a very popular decision. 300 people came to the meeting. People were anxious and upset because nothing was happening with the protests that they were filing. Politicians liked the idea because they could court all these leaders from around the state without spending tens of thousands of dollars in travel time. The candidates gladly hosted lunches and dinners for 3 days. The delegates enjoyed free meals. Felton Griffin from the First Baptist Church in Anchorage gave the keynote speech, and he encouraged us. He said it was the right thing to do, and it gave us the inspiration we needed. The first committee we sent out was the Land Committee. I appointed Willie Hensley, chairman, a bright young college student who wrote a paper on land rights. He was assisted by Marvin Sanowski of Washington, D.C., who was an Indian land lawyer and knew a lot about the history of dealings with the federal government and Native issues. But that position paper that we adopted at AFN became the first bill introduced into the Senate, into the Congress. It became Senate Bill 2020. Over time, there were 8 bills introduced. Everybody got into the act. Senate Interior Committee, House Interior Committee, State of Alaska, BLM, Forest Service. There were many, many bills. The newspapers were against us. Editorials and most of the big papers in Alaska opposed us, and they wondered what we thought we were doing. People of Alaska were wondering what we were trying to do. They'd never seen anything like this, and it was the first time anyone tried to settle land claims through legislation rather than going through the courts. Governor Hickel opposed us. He claimed we had no legal claim to Alaska. We had no legal rights to Alaska. He thought maybe the United States had a moral obligation to deal with us. In October 1966, we agreed to form an organization. We met in Fairbanks in January 1967. The Attorney General, Don Burr, came to Fairbanks representing the governor, and told us we had no rights. We had no legal reason to be causing trouble for the state and claiming that Alaska belonged to Native people. As an organization, we got busy at that time. We met long hours to develop a bill, line by line, word by word, with a full board of directors and delegates and 12 attorneys. And that was a real hodgepodge of ideas and a lot of arguments, but we tested all of the ideas and came up with the first bill. We introduced that bill, and I think it was a good idea. We got the initiative. If we did not submit a bill, we would have been trying to change the BIA bill. And instead, they were trying to change our bill. So that gave us a little bit of a head start on it. It was a complicated bill. It had revenue sharing. It had two-tier formula for land distribution. It had regional corporations and village corporations, and a lot of detail that had to be worked out. But the people that were attending that meeting were dedicated from all around the villages. They paid their own ways, paid their own hotel bills, paid their meals, took time off from work. Cecil Barnes from Cordova mortgaged his home so that he could attend the meetings. Willie Hensley was a young college student who had no responsibilities, so he took out a $10,000 life insurance policy and made AFN the beneficiary for that in case something happened to him. I did not get paid and got behind 3 months on my house and car. We borrowed office space, a telephone, typewriters from the BIA. We had no money, no office, no assets, nothing. We started with nothing. I got a call from first of all, on the urging of the Tundra Times, people from all around the state, many of the villages, were sending $2 donations. People were excited to see that something was happening. And that's what financed AFN for the first couple of years. I got a call from Senator Bob Bartlett, and he told me we should come back to DC. He had put together a meeting at the request of Governor Hickel with the Secretary of Interior, Stuart Udall. I called a meeting on a Sunday afternoon with the Cook Inlet Native Association and asked for donations. We raised $1,200 at that meeting. I called Willie Hensley in Fairbanks. It was enough money to send 2 people to Washington, D.C. He came through from Fairbanks at Anchorage. He got on a plane, and we flew all night and got to D.C. and went to Senator Bartlett's office and walked in. They let us right into the meeting. That stopped the meeting. whatever the conversation was, it stopped. It was between the governor, Stuart Juneau, put together by Senator Bartlett. I suspect the Hickle wanted to come up with a plan that the state, the federal government could live with. But from my point of view, that put our governments on notice that whenever they met about land, we were going to be involved. We talked to anybody that we could find that would listen to us and try to get support for land claims for what we were doing. Laura Burke went on a Johnny Carson show. Willie Hensley got on Good Morning America. John Borbridge and I were on late talk show in Philadelphia, late night talk show. I went to Detroit to talk to the American Council of Churches. The morning of the meeting, when I got up to make my pitch to these church people, some young people, there were about 12 bishops at the podium, and these young people came in with buckets of red paint and went all across it, pouring red paint on the paperwork of the bishops. And to the credit of the bishops, they folded their arms and sat there and watched it happen, and the people went away. They didn't, excuse me, they didn't call security. They didn't cause a fuss. After they left, the meeting continued. They introduced me, and I talked to the Council of Churches. There were 10,000 preachers in the audience. And after I made the pitch for support for land claims, somebody way in back of the room got a microphone and said, before we endorse any legislation, we should know what's in the bill. The Secretary of the World Council of Churches got the microphone and said, what do we care what's in the bill? If the Native people want it and are satisfied with it, we should support them. We got a unanimous endorsement from the Council of Churches. And the plan was, any Sunday morning, those 10,000 preachers were talking to 40 million Americans. And they were told their people to write the congressman and support the native land claims in Alaska. We got the endorsement of AFL-CIO, which was a big endorsement. They have a lot of political influence. Congress did not give much attention to the 12 regional attorneys. Each region had, and they were not incorporated. They weren't corporations. They were just a group of people from the different regions in Alaska. Congress did not pay much attention to them. They were good attorneys and good intentions, but they just didn't have the influence. We would show up at a meeting in D.C. after flying down there and go into the hearing, and they'd say, come back tomorrow. Alaska land claims was not a big issue. They were dealing with the war in Vietnam. They were dealing with riots on the streets. They had students killed on college campuses. They were busy doing many other things. We were not a priority. In order to get attention, I was invited to go to Seattle to talk to the Northwest Federated Tribes at the Pacific Lutheran University. There were about 800 people in the room. So in order to get attention, this had been about 2.5, 3 years of testifying, and I wanted to say something more than we've been testifying to Congress. We weren't getting anywhere. So I made what I call a separate nation speech. I said, the United States spent billions of dollars to create a country for people who had no homeland. We created the country of Israel. How could they do less for people that lost all of the North American continent? They should create a separate nation for indigenous people in America. That created some attention in Alaska. I got the personal editorial of the Anchorage Times. I got called the communist on the floor of the Senate here in Juneau. Strangely, I got a few newspaper clippings from around the country. I don't know how they found me, but I got them. My intention was for Congress to say, what are you talking about? A native nation. I wanted them to deal with the issue. So we had a lot of opposition. Sportsmen's associations especially opposed us. The local sportsmen's group were working nationally with the national sporting groups who opposed us. I was warned one day to watch out. There's a contract out on me. So I called Avram Gross, the Attorney General of Alaska, and I asked him what he knew about it. He said, I know nothing about it, but stay right where you are. 15 minutes later, the head of the state troopers called me and said, what you've been hearing is true. What you don't know, that we're with you 24 hours a day. We watch your kids go to school. We watch them come home from school. We go to lunch with you. They took the threat serious. And they spiked it. They knew who the people involved were, and they put a stop to it. When we testified in Alaska, there were long, day-long hearings in Anchorage, and we had a lot of local opposition, people testifying against land claims. Get land like everybody else, buy it, inherit it, whatnot. But the point was that there was just a lot of people against it. Because we need an attorney of our own. AFN did not have an attorney. The 12 regions had an attorney, and we're trying to get them to work together. And it was hard to do. There were too many legal opinions, so we looked around and we got the former Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg to be our lead attorney. He brought with him former United States Attorney General Ramsey Clark, and they made a difference. Well, the first time I went forward to testify, I had Arthur Goldberg here, former Supreme Court Justice, and I had Ramsey Clark here, former Attorney General. Justice Goldberg said, Mr. Chairman, this is a matter of national honor. It's the last chance for the United States government to deal fairly with the indigenous people in America. A legal question came up, and Ramsey Clark answered it. And when he was finished, he said, Mr. Chairman, that's my recollection of the law. If you'd like, I'll brief the question for you. And the chairman said, General, if that's your recollection of the law, I accept it. Finally, we had two national figures that gave us credibility, and Congress paid more attention to what we were doing. When President Nixon got elected, Hickel was 2 years as governor, and rumor got around that Hickel was going to be Secretary of Interior. Coming back from a meeting with Nixon, he switched planes in Seattle, and Udall had put on a second land freeze called the Big Land Freeze. So he stopped all transfers of land. And Hickel accused us of driving the state into bankruptcy. So in Seattle, when he was switching planes, a reporter asked him, what are you going to do about the land freeze? Hickel also filed a lawsuit against the land freeze. When it finally went through the courts, he was Secretary of Interior, and it ended up in the law records as Hickel v. Hickel. He filed it, and then he defended it. So When he was asked what are you going to do about the land freeze, he said, what you all can do with a stroke of a pen, I can undo. Of course, that got our attention because we needed the land freeze. And the chairman of the committee wanted the land freeze held. And the chairman said, we want the land freeze because if Congress ever gets around to a settlement, we want the corpus intact, so to speak, so we'll have something to divide up. So they had stopped all transfers of land. When we had clear legal standing, one of the last ones was Statehood Act. When Alaska Statehood Bill was moving through Congress, Congressman Ed Edmondson from Oklahoma took it into his committee and wouldn't release it until he put language in the bill that said, the state and its people forever disclaim any right or title to land claimed or used by Indian people in Alaska. So that was strong language. Congress had to deal with the issue. About the time Hickel was returning from D.C., after his talk with President Nixon, there was trouble in Bethel. And I got a call one day, you have to go to Bethel. I said, what for? He said, they weren't sure there's trouble out there. So I got on a 7 o'clock in the morning plane to Bethel, and the state trooper was on the plane, full dress uniform, and he came over to sit by me. He was in full dress uniform. He was a nice guy. I knew him. So we had a nice talk, and he said, what are you going to Bethel for? I said, well, I'm not sure. Asked him what he was going to Bethel for. And he said, I'm not sure either. He got a call from the governor's office and said, get out to Bethel. So the trouble in Bethel was that fishermen were selling king salmon. And I watched them beach the boat, aluminum boats, and they're throwing king salmon ashore. And the guys are grading them, small, medium, small, medium. I saw some pretty big kings go by, but they were never called big kings. There was a senator from Big Lake on the radio telling the fishermen, sell to the Japanese. The fishermen were afraid they would go to jail. They were told it was illegal. I got on a little float plane and I flew down to the fish camps, and I'd climb the bank. Typical fish camps, a couple of dogs running around, little kids running around, the parents and the grandparents. So I'd climb the bank and tell them if the Japanese offer you fish, to buy your fish, sell it. There's a Japanese freezer at the mouth of the Kuskokwim, and they weren't buying. There was opposition to them. So I got back to Bethel, and 10 o'clock that same night, I was on the way to Juneau to ask Hickel to support 40 million acres of land. And so the attorney I was riding with said, I wouldn't do that. And I said, well, I think I'll do it after we finish talking about. I was going down there to ask him to support 40 million acres. But I didn't have to bring it up because 7 o'clock in the morning, he came in and he pointed at me and said, what in blazes are you doing taking the governor's office off in Bethel? And so we talked about the price of fish. State law said you buy fish by the pound, not in the round. So he said that changed. They're not doing that anymore. And he wanted us to help him with Congress. He said he had bought a Norwegian tour ship, and he wanted to convert it to Alaska, a ferry system from Seattle. He couldn't do it because the federal law said you can't use a foreign ship between American ports. So he couldn't use Seattle. So he had to use it out of Vancouver to come to Alaska. And he wanted us to help him change that. We couldn't change it. It'd been in existence since 1934, and it's still there today. So we didn't do much help for him for that. got back, and the attorney called me at 5 o'clock, and he said, Secretary of Interior wants to talk to you. Well, I thought of Udall right away, and then it took me a second to realize he meant Hickle. So I said, I don't know where he lives. He said, I'll pick you up. So we went to Hickle's house, and in the room was Larry Fanning, who was publisher of the morning paper, and his reporter, Joe Rothstein. And Hickle was holding in his hand a syndicated column by Jack Anderson. And that column said, Hickle does not deserve to be Secretary of Interior because of his treatment of the Eskimos in Bethel. So Hickle asked me, do you talk to outside Indians? I said, yes. He said, can you get me an endorsement? I said, maybe. He said, will AFN endorse me? And I said, I'll call a special meeting and take a vote on it. But I said, before I do that, I need a public statement from you that you will not lift the land freeze. If you lift the land freeze, we have no protection. If he promised me here that he would not lift it, if he did lift it, what could I say? You promised not to do it? He's the Governor and Secretary of Interior. I would have, whatever I said would have no effect. So we left the meeting, and the attorney was very upset, to put it mildly. He said, you called the governor a liar. I said, no, I didn't. He said, yes, you did. You didn't believe him. I said, I need a public statement from him before I'll do that. And he said, well, you made a mistake. You're going to have to deal with him as governor if he does not make it. You're going to have to deal with him if he does deal with him as Secretary of Interior, if he makes it. So that's lose-lose. I said, that's a chance we have to take. So I did not endorse him. I called a special meeting of AFM. And the board of directors said, take 3 people with you, go to DC to the Hickle nomination hearings in the Senate. So I picked John Barbridge, Willie Hensley, Eben Hobson from Barrow. And we went down there we were there 3 days ahead of the hearings. We lobbied all the senators in the committee. And we'd walk into senator's office and say, we're from Alaska. And they'd say, come on in. He put us in the back room and started asking us questions. What do you know about Hickle's Hotels? What do you know about his owner of the gas line from Kenai? What do you know about the road? What do you know? He said, we know nothing about his businesses. All we want to do is hold the land freeze. So we got to the hearings, and they were very hot hearings. That was the biggest thing going on in DC, practically. All the big environmental firms were against Hickle. He was a developer, and they didn't want him as Secretary of Interior. So for 3 days, we sat in the hearings. And we'd get there early because there was standing room only, and we'd get there early and get the front row seats. On the 3rd day, we got in there, and the first 3 rows were reserved. So we sat in the 4th row. And just before the Senate started, the door opened and came who's who in Alaska. Editors, businessmen, bankers, union people. And Ted Stevens said, Mr. Chairman, I want to introduce these outstanding Alaskans who came here to support our governor to be Secretary of Interior. I want them to stand. So the first 3 rows stood up, and the 4 of us, sitting right behind them, didn't stand. So he'd turn around and say, what the heck's wrong with you guys? Stand up. But we didn't. We waited until they extracted a promise from Hickle that he would not lift the land freeze. And the board said, you can endorse him, you can oppose him, you can stay neutral. So we waited until he promised not to lift the land freeze, and we went forward and said, Hickel would make a great Secretary of Interior. So we supported him in the end. We proposed the first bill, but in the end, it was not a negotiated settlement. It was unilateral. They handed the bill out and said, here it is, take it or leave it. That was after 4.5 years. We had no more money. We were tired. We had borrowed $100,000 from Tyonek. We borrowed $250,000 from the Yakima tribe with no collateral, with no promise of ever paying them back. It was a leap of faith for them to lend us the money. We could not have done what we did without it. There was no support in Congress for 40 million acres for the first 4 years. Never got any support, except for two people. Senator Kennedy and Senator Fred Harris from Oklahoma introduced a bill for 60 million acres. They knew it was not going anywhere. They wanted to make a statement. The Senate and the House were controlled by Democrats. Don Wright convinced some, not interns, but young people from the White House that 40 million acres was what we needed. They convinced the Chief of Staff for President Nixon, who liked the idea. So he introduced a bill for us supporting 40 million acres. When Nixon did that, the Republicans supported him. When the Republicans supported him, the Democrats, who for the past 4 years opposed it, joined them. So that's how we got 40 million acres. Pure serendipity, just perfect alignment of events after 4.5 years. There were hundreds of people involved. They traveled and testified. Land claims was a major accomplishment. Our parliamentarian for the 4 years, or for the full time, was John Hope from Sitka. He was a great man. William Paul, Sr., was always at our meetings, giving us advice, and many times opposing what we're trying to do. But he had a voice, and he knew what he was talking about, and gave us great advice. People attended from all over the state. Washington, D.C. never saw so many Native people from Alaska. Vincent Price, a movie star, came to Anchorage for a fundraiser. Johnny Cash put out a public service announcement telling people across the country, if you're an Alaska Native, sign up to your region. So we had people from all over the place that supported us. It was one of the big debates was, should Tlingit and Haida join AFN? There was a lot of opposition to it. It took a half a day of arguing. I was in the chair. I put it to a vote. It came to a tie, 12 to 12. I broke the tie, and that allowed Tlingit and Haida to join AFN in the settlement. I was asked why I did that, and I said it was the right thing to do. They had $7 million settlement through the courts and no land. They had a much better deal by joining us from in AFN. So land claims changed the history of Alaska, changed everything in Alaska. Today, the corporations are multi-billion-dollar corporations. They pay taxes. They have nice office buildings in the cities. They hire a lot of people. it's making a great deal of interest and has made a great deal of interest in Alaska. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Yeah, questions.
Do you want to start? Well, we have some time for questions from the audience as well as any that come in online. If anybody would like to pose a question.
Thank you for that history. I was wondering if you could speak at all to the question of if you hadn't taken that serendipitous proposal that you said was unilateral, take it or leave it. If you had opted to, even though you were all exhausted and borrowed precarious amounts of money, if you hadn't taken it, do you know what may have transpired in the next few years? And then maybe up into the further future today.
No, I suppose if we didn't take it, I don't think it would have changed much. I think Nixon would have signed it as it was, even an overall objection. So I don't think it would have made any difference. Other questions? Oh, thank you.
We have.
Did you see how I said to him, stay there? I could still order this big man around. I'm going to tell you that we are so fortunate to have had such a great leader as Emil Notti addressing our native land claims. Were it not for Emil and others like Emil, Willie Hensley, John Borbridge, and the others that he named, John Hope, those guys worked so hard for us. We know, and I know that you have been taught, that this is our homeland. Alaska is Alaska Native homeland. We have owned and occupied our lands for thousands and thousands of years. We know that. Emil knew that. And they went to Congress. They went to Congress of the United States to make the claim that this is our land and we should have title to it. They said it was illegal, but yet it wasn't legal when they took it away from us, not according to our laws. There's one thing I have to say is that in history, it's the oil companies who are given credit for the passage of that land claims. They say they needed to settle Aboriginal land claims because they needed to take that oil out of the ground. The state of Alaska needed those revenues. The oil companies needed to develop that oil. But in the story of it, you don't hear the story of the oil companies. You hear the political ingenuity of our native leaders lobbying without any money. Can you think about that? How would we go to Congress if we didn't have any money to settle our Aboriginal land claims? And then to have somebody like Emil Notti vote to allow Southeast Alaska Natives to participate in the land claims. We have to thank Emil Notti for that vote that he cast. I want all of you to say, two come here. You and you. You two come up here. Okay, say Amo Notti. Amo Notti. Amo Notti. Goodness cheese. And I want my two little students to come up here. We want our youth to know about you. We want them to know our history, and so we're so glad that our students are here. These are the ones that are going to carry our history forward. And now, if those two students standing here, tell Emil your name. Loud.
Lauren. One more time. Lauren. Thank you.
Learn to use your Chilkat voice. Talk loud. Uh-huh. Okay, can you put this blanket on Emil? We wrap Emil Notti in our love. We wrap Emil Notti in our gratitude for his leadership. We wrap our Chilkat, a replica of our Chilkat, around Emil Notti because we so much thank you for all the work you've done. Thank you. Goodness. Okay, take pictures. Take pictures. I want the students to come up here and stand by Emil, and so we could take pictures. Okay. Uh-huh.
Just kneel? Just kneel?